Hello and welcome to this episode of SelfKind with me, Erica, and my wonderful guest today, who I have been kind of poking and prodding to, to come on for quite a while. So I'm excited. I am joined by Holly from Movement Labs in Singapore. And Holly, I have written down a few notes about what it is that you do, and I was going to read them out, but I actually really love for my guests to introduce themselves because I know before we hopped on this call, actually, I was updating some of my own website and I realized that so much of what we do stays consistent, but also a lot of the way that we talk about it changes. And so I would love actually just to sort of throw it over to you to introduce yourself, just chuck you right in on the deep end. Introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about, who you are and what it is that you do in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you like peeking into the notebook I have over here with the long list of website edits that are due to be made? Because yes, language changes, the way we talk about what we do evolves. Yeah, so I currently own and operate a movement studio in Singapore. We offer personal training and small group fitness. And it's taken me a long time to step into using the words that in the context of where we are a radical fitness space. There's a lot of things that we do very differently from a lot of other places. And we fancy ourselves to be a home for folks that don't feel comfortable in more conventional or traditional gym or fitness settings. And that can be applied in a lot of different ways, but that is the niche that we are aiming to fill in the Singapore space. As for me, my pronouns are she, her. I'm an American by birth. I grew up in the U.S. I married basically a Singaporean, and we moved here for 2 years, about 11 years ago, 12 years ago now. And we're still here. We now have a home and 3 kids who believe they are Singaporean, and a business. And, we're here for the long haul. Don't tell my parents, but, they pretty much accepted it at this point.
Yeah.
So that's I'm a biochemist by training. I have a PhD in biochemistry, but I had a very early midlife crisis and went into basically when we first moved to Singapore, um, I didn't have a job. We moved with my husband's job. And I was looking for research positions, but we thought we were staying for 2 years. And in
Hmm.
science, that's a really short term for a project. Most
Hmm.
projects are about 4 years. And so I was having trouble finding a position, and I wasn't super enthused about science. I was kind of burnt out. And I built this little website because I had a lot of time. My husband was working a lot, and I wasn't. And I built a website to promote run coaching because that's what I was doing. That's what I had done a little bit on the side when I was working in science. And so I just went into WordPress. This is pre-Wix, pre-Squarespace,
Hmm.
pre any of that. I, got the book from the library. What is it? WordPress for Dummies, and basically used my persistence, and I can figure this out that I cultivated after many years in research, and I just built a website and wrote a blog and did all those SEO things I don't do now, but I had a lot of time to do back then. And people started coming and people were interested. And that's how I got started in the movement scene. I worked at a commercial gym for quite a few years in different capacities. As my life changed, the people that I served shifted. And
Hmm.
right before the pandemic, I signed a lease on a brick and mortar space to open my own business.
The
Don't
timing.
do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Terrible idea. But here we are.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I get to make I now I get to make the rules and set the policy, and it's a wonderful thing. I'm really, really grateful for the space and for the people who found their way into our space.
Yeah, that's really cool. One of the things I want to sort of loop back to a couple of things that you said, but one of
Yeah.
the reasons that I wanted to talk to you on the podcast was because you do things in a slightly different way to perhaps more mainstream, which I think in the circles that you and I hang out in, that is true for the bulk of us, I think. And so it can become very much our echo chamber of, well, we all do things differently, and so it's becoming the norm. And then you only have to step a little sideways to realize that, oh, actually, this is still, like you say, kind of radical.
Mm.
So I'm curious. I have two questions, and I'm not sure which one to ask you first. But I'm kind of curious about your early midlife crisis. So I don't know if you want to go into that a little bit. So that's question number one. I don't normally give choices, but anyway, we're going to give choices for questions as is, the way that we both teach movement. We're going to give some choices. Um, or going down the path of talking about what makes your approach radical in the context of where you are. So I want to obviously touch on both of them, but which one do you want to answer first?
We'll do the midlife crisis first, I think.
Awesome.
So I guess crisis maybe is a slightly dramatic word. I had, I don't know how much you know about getting a PhD in research science, but I basically worked in a lab for 6 years toward a PhD, and I was doing some teaching, and I was like doing research, doing teaching, taking care of the lab, various lab things, and then did a bit of work beyond that as well. But I think what I observed were quite a few things. The first one was that I worked a lot, and that is heralded by that is esteemed by people in research. The more work you do, the more results you get, the more you publish. That's the rhetoric. And the more you publish, the more successful you are. So working a lot was what was held up as the ideal. In fact, I started coaching runners because I needed something to do that wasn't just being in the lab for 15 hours a day, because that's what I would have otherwise defaulted to. My husband and I were living 3,000 miles apart. Sorry, that's about 5,000 kilometers for anyone. So I had a lot of time. I didn't have a lot of other commitments in my life at that point that were taking up a lot of time. So it was easy for me to just work all the time. And that was praised by people in the field. When you think about the way and what all of your most mentors are grooming their students for when they're going through a PhD in science is to become a research scientist at a research institute at a university. Now, there's a very nasty pyramid scheme involved in that, whereby someone might train 30 or 40 PhD students in their career, but when they retire, they leave one vacancy. So you very quickly end up with many more students than you have, many more candidates than you have positions. So the math doesn't work. Although that's what's held up as the ideal, what you want to do. At the time, it was also a really poor time in science funding. So my research advisor and a lot of the folks that I had that were mentoring me when I was in graduate school were losing funding. So again, Australia might be a little bit different, but in the
It's
US,
actually quite similar. I have a very close family member who is a research scientist and has ascended that particular process. So, and I remember actually really well the defunding that happened here as well. So I wonder if it might even be similar timing. Yeah.
This is about 2008, 2010
Yeah.
is when it was. I mean, it was right around when the markets crashed, and then funding got tight for everybody. But in research, you're basically constantly writing grants for your research. So the fact that the university will provide a very small stipend for teaching and the lab space. But beyond that, if you want money for supplies, then you have to write grants and get results. And you do that forever. There's no, you can get tenure, which means you'll have your office and a very small stipend for teaching your classes. But for your research, you have to constantly be asking for money. And that's a 3 to 5 year cycle, but you're never off of it because you want several grants running and there's always something to write. And, so it's a never ending sort of treadmill, I guess you could say. And watching really successful folks that I admired and I thought were doing great work have their money pulled despite working ridiculous amounts just felt really crappy. And, I was also at a point where I was getting ready to cohabitate with my husband for the first time. We knew that we had an idea that we might want to start a family. And I was already feeling guilty when I wasn't at work. And I just kind of knowing myself, I was really reluctant to put myself in a position where I was always going to feel guilty about not working when I was home.
Mm.
And when I was at work, I was going to feel guilty about not being at home. The idea of adding, although we were many years away from it, the idea of adding children to that mix just felt really mucky. And I didn't, if I had been a different person, I might have been okay. Or, yeah. But I felt that I was
Yeah.
constantly going to be guilty and feel guilty and feel too pulled. And I didn't like that idea.
Yeah.
So that left me a lot more open to a different idea. And I
Mm.
will say I did not walk away. It was a long process because I had been literally working on and in science for 10 years,
Yeah.
12 years, which I guess in the grand scheme of your working life, now that I look at it, 10,
Perspective. Yeah.
15 years later, it doesn't seem like that much. But at that time, it felt like I had invested
Huge.
everything in this and I was just going to turn my back on it.
Yeah.
And that felt really uncomfortable and scary. And it was not what my peers were doing. And I guess I wasn't quite as comfortable being a disruptor then as I am now. Now that's pretty par for the course for me.
It was
But
like your initiation into that.
yeah, and so what had actually happened is I had finished the term of my work in the lab I was working in, and my husband took a leave of absence, and we traveled for 6 months,
Oh,
which,
amazing.
like I said, we'd been married for a few years, but we hadn't been living in the same city, even on the same coast of the States. And during that time, I was kind of looking for work, but my heart wasn't really in it. And um, we were contemplating a relocation, and I didn't really know what that meant for me. And then when it turned out that those pieces came together, we landed here. It was not a great time to get hired in science here. And as I said, I
Mm.
didn't have a good amount of time to commit. I had too little time. I was willing to commit. I didn't want to sign a 4-year contract. And so I started playing with this run coaching, which I had thought was kind of fun. And it turned out to be something I really enjoyed. And I ended up with a full roster of clients. And I realized pretty fast that I liked it more than than being in the lab all day. No, I enjoy being in the lab, but there were a lot of things about science I did not love.
Mm.
And I could see that I could probably draw the lines around my work a little more clearly, or um, no, that's not actually not true, because now I work from my computer, which is wherever I am. Um, but I had a lot more freedom because I could run things the way I wanted to, as opposed to
Mm.
science, where I was really pushed into a set of rules that someone else wrote. The
Yeah.
due date for the grant was this, the length of the grant is that, and there's no negotiating that.
Mm.
Nowadays, there's a lot riding on my business for sure, but if if something happens at home, or if I decide I need to reallocate my time for a while, that's my choice to make, and it might delay a business goal, but that's all it does,
Mm.
right?
Yes.
And I definitely did not have it in mind to open a brick and mortar studio when I left science. But I did have an idea that I wanted more control over how I was conducting my time. Although scientists would say they have a lot of control because they can do what they want when they want, but you're on this bigger timeline, this bigger
Yeah.
rat race sort of treadmill of funding. Um,
Mm.
and I wanted more flexibility. I'm married to an attorney who at the time was working quite intensively as well. And I knew that if we had a family, then one of us would need some more give.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I love what you said about, sort of that rigidity of the rules. Even if there was some level of flexibility kind of baked into the system, there was still that overarching inflexibility. And I feel like that's actually a really amazing segue into talking about what's so radical about the work that you do, because I'm listening to you just going, oh, the parallels are like significant, right? This idea that we're kind of in this structure that, you know, we almost don't question, because it is just the
Mhm.
structure that we've been presented with for, however long we've been in the system, whether that's a workplace system or a movement and exercise paradigm. We tend not to question the structure until we do. I had a similar kind of early midlife crisis in my early 20s and mid 20s maybe, and the confusion over doing something that was so far removed from what peers were doing was significant. And so I want to kind of like preface this conversation that we're about to have around the kind of radical nature of the work that you're doing in the fitness space by sort of saying, and I think people who listen to this podcast are, well and truly prepared for that, but by sort of saying like the parallels are significant and very present around the way that we think about other structures in our lives and in our worlds. And so just kind of like keep some keep your eye on that, I think. Listen out for that, because every time I have a conversation like this, I'm like, oh, that sheds light on all these other things, like, oh, where am I, still kind of perpetuating that structure that I don't want to be perpetuating, etc. So thank you for sharing that too, by the way. I love hearing people's stories, particularly around those big decisions, because it can be so tricky to walk away from something that you have invested not only time but money and identity as well into. So thank you for sharing that with us. To segue into this radical work that you're doing, tell me what you mean by that, because even that word has a lot of oomph in it. What do you mean by sort of providing a radical departure, I suppose, from typical fitness spaces?
Yeah, I love the parallel that you draw there. And actually, I mean, it sits in lots of places. And I guess what I would say is that, between the time that I basically decided I was taking a pause on research and then ultimately decided I would not be going back, because after a couple of years out, it's really kind of not where it's not easy to get back in. Between that time and the time I opened the brick and mortar studio, there were about 2012 till 2019. So it was 7 years in there. And in that time, I ran an online run coaching business with a little bit of in-person work at some of the tracks in Singapore. And I got involved in some of the gym settings here. And I was teaching some group fitness classes, some strength, some cycling, some yoga, that kind of stuff. And then started doing a little bit of personal training on the side. That was not at the gym. And, it's funny to hear you say that and reflect that back, about the flexibility, because actually the exact same thing happened at the commercial gym. I had, as an instructor, I had a lot of flexibility, and I am very grateful for the opportunities that particular gym gave me, because I learned a lot. Because they put a lot of people in front of me. I got to see a lot of people move. I got to watch a lot of mentors teach. I learned so much. And at the end of the day, meaning 6 years later, I got tired of the fact that I could have this wonderful yoga class where I'm teaching around the idea of listening to your body and kind of, moving with what you're given that day, and all these concepts that, you and I and your listeners, I think, are kind of quite familiar with. And then everyone would walk out of the studio and there's a great big enormous poster on the tack board that says, sweat is fat crying.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like or, count those calories for whatever. And I just got tired of the disconnect. Yes, I could teach what I wanted in my class, but when my members then stepped out into the bigger gym space, the same crud was there.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things that ultimately, like, I had control over what I said in my classes and how I taught, as long as I was tending to folks' needs in some way, shape, or form, and people were coming. I was allowed to keep my class. No one was really micromanaging how and what I taught. But in the scope of the bigger gym space, I couldn't control the messaging, and I eventually got tired of that. So
Yeah.
yes, I had some micro control, but I was still in a bigger system. I had been advocating for some pre and postnatal classes and training for folks, because it's done really poorly out here. And, I had gone out and done my own training and mentorship and whatnot. But so I was seeing a lot of things I didn't like. And I said, well, how about we do this? But, as one little person in the big system, no one really, you don't get a lot of traction. So, definitely the same idea of being in a bigger system that doesn't meet the needs that I see being needed or wanting to meet, I guess. And
Mm,
eventually I just got tired of it. And it was a lot of messaging. So I guess what makes us radical? I don't guess. I know there are a lot of things we do that make us radical in the context of Singapore and in fitness spaces in general. I will say, I assume the majority of your listeners are from Australia. And to be frank, I don't actually know what's going on the ground in Australia. A lot of times it sort of mirrors the US, where things are moving in the right direction, but they're still moving slowly, I guess I would say, in
yeah.
terms of the mindset around a lot of these things. I would say in Asia, things move even slower. We are probably 5 to 10 years behind the US
Mm,
in that sense. So whereas there is kind of a beginning, and it's a bit tricky, as you say, because we operate in this ecosystem where a lot of us are on the board with the same stuff. So what's happening in the broader picture? Sometimes we get into this. I'm not really sure, but I do sort of try to keep my finger on that because I think it's important to speaking to most people's experiences truly. So I think what I know that what there are a variety of things that make us unusual. Um, we prioritize accessibility, and so that means that our physical access. When I was looking to the Australians and Americans, this may be a bit odd, but in Singapore, if you are in an old building, there's no requirement to retrofit pretty much anything for any kind of access.
hmm,
So when I was opening my studio space, it was essential to me that someone be able to wheel a wheelchair or a pram up into the space without having to lift it up any stairs.
yeah.
And in my neighborhood, which is where my studio is, I live and work in the same neighborhood. There were basically two buildings that met that criteria.
Hmm,
Um,
wow.
and yes, and as it stands, there's still a step into my studio, and I have a portable ramp that I can put out. I'm not allowed to leave it out permanently, but I can put it out if someone needs it to wheel into the studio.
Hmm.
So we're looking at physical access. I'm looking at the equipment that's in my space. Is it accessible for people in different sizes, in different kinds of bodies? I'm thinking about do we have equipment that allows us to manipulate weight in lots of ways? Not everybody has a strong grip, or maybe can't use a certain kind of grip, or can't hold things a certain way. Do we have different kinds of weights? Do we have other ways that people can lift stuff up so that they can access our equipment in different ways? Do we have a variety of tools, as in brain tools? Can we train different muscles in different ways, so we're not all requiring, if you can't do this, let's do that, if we can't do this, let's do that? And that could be anything from, my athletes coming in with a mucked up ankle, can we still do their core and upper body training even if they can't jump? Yes. To someone who's managing a permanent health condition or issue that might affect the way that they move, can we still create ways for them to train in our space that might be a little different from normal, so to speak, right? One of my big gripes, and you've probably seen this on social media, is when some fitness space says, "Oh, this is for everyone." I say it's not for everyone. It doesn't matter what you're doing. I can always think of somebody that class is not for.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a
And we just
really important point. It's so important because I think we can get stuck into that easily thinking that, oh, because it's sort of gentler or because it's, whatever. Whereas I know I've had clients come who cannot get down on the floor. So it's like, well, if I'm teaching floor-based movement, it's actually not accessible to you. And so, yes, I really appreciate that point. And I appreciate your
so we're
honesty too around that, of being like, well, this is actually not for everyone. It can't be for everyone, even though I'm trying to make it as accessible as I can.
in a class setting, we try to be very clear on our class booking that these are sort of the prerequisites you need. It gets sticky, right?
Hmm.
How detailed can you be, right? But we try to set some basic ideas of what we'll be doing in class so that people can understand if they might be a good fit for class. One-on-one, we do our best. But I just had someone say to me the other day, do you have a sign language interpreter? I said, no, I don't. If if you if you prefer to communicate with sign language, maybe we can work on bringing someone in who can help us. or I can see if I can access, there's groups that may have some more access to that, but it's not something I do right now. I don't
Yeah.
have someone interpreting my classes. I don't. We don't offer real time captioning on the class. Like there are certain things that we don't do.
Yeah.
I think part of confronting part of confronting this is realizing that we truly can't do everything. Um,
Yeah.
you know, and there's a business lesson there as well. But so we try to think broadly about access. I know that I'm leaving groups out. That I know I know that there are people who won't be served by our space. But like I said, we're thinking about physical access of the space. We're thinking about the way that we move inside the space. We are thinking about, we have our changing rooms, our shower, our bathrooms are gender neutral. So we keep our, I have a little more liberty now. This is a place we need to tread very cautiously about what I say in Singapore. But we have our pink heart in our window, which is a LGBTQIA
Ah,
thing in
okay.
Singapore. And so we keep that up in our window kind of year round.
Hmm.
Because we want to be a space that is more comfortable. You don't have
Hmm.
to choose whether you're going to go into the ladies' room or the men's room. You can just go into the bathroom because we just have a bathroom.
Yeah.
Our intake forms ask for your pronouns and your preferred name and with whom you'd be comfortable with us using those names, right? So,
Yeah.
we do our best to think about groups who may not be well served, who may not
Mm.
be tended to in a bigger fitness setting, and do what we can to make them feel a little more comfortable. And it's funny, my daughter spends some time at the studio. All my kids spend some time at the studio. That's a whole nother reason that we were a little bit radical. But she drew a sign the other day that said "All are welcome," and she hung it on the window. And I've been mulling over it because I love that that's what she takes away from our space. But also, if you're trampling on the comfort of someone who is otherwise marginalized, you're actually
You're
not
not
really
welcome.
welcome in my
Yeah.
space. So,
Yeah.
I think as someone who lives in the majority, or in, I come from the majority in a lot of ways. I
Yeah.
live in an able body. I live in a body that's thin. I identify as a female. I look like a female. I'm married to a man. I have kids. Like, in many ways, I fit what is conventional.
Yeah.
So I think that in that sense, it it puts me in a position of privilege to hopefully try to create space for people that may not have that. So
Mm.
if you're going to trample on that, then no, you're not welcome. But the sign is still up in the
Yeah.
window.
Yeah. But I think that you've by sharing that story about the sign too, you've shared something that's so significant and something that I come back to consider all the time. You know, this concept of like the both and of how we can be trying to do, you know, something and still be falling short in some ways, right? And how that really kind of just mirrors the human experience of recognizing that it is going to be uncomfortable and messy and it's not tidy and it is complex. But one of the things that you're sort of kind of like you talked about the accessibility of the equipment within the studio. What I really love about that is that by taking that approach, you're really sort of giving the message that the individuals in the space are never the problem, right? For why something cannot be achieved or accessed or whatever. Now, you might not always be able to cater to everybody's needs, but it still doesn't make them the problem, right? We and I can kind of just picture myself walking into sort of gym spaces. I've always gone to the gym, not in recent years I've stopped, but I always was a member of a gym sort of from my early 20s all the way through till not that long ago. And it's really easy to feel like a problem in those spaces. It's really easy to feel like you're the issue, you know? And likewise, I have a lot of privilege, and I'm very cognizant of that. And, you know, so you layer on some of these challenges, and it's very, very, very easy to just be like, well, obviously I'm a problem. And so then people end up feeling excluded from spaces that maybe never intended for that to be the case, but there is just not that consideration of like, how is this actual space and equipment and, you know, all of that stuff contributing to somebody's ability to show up and feel like they can be there with a level of comfort and inclusivity that, you know, actually inspires them to be doing what they're there to do. Because that's the irony, right? Is that we're there to care for ourselves. We're there to feel, you know, strong and, or to make our fat cry. I hate those signs. I've told this story on the podcast several times, but the gym that I went to for years had sweat is weakness leaving the body. No, pain is weakness leaving the body, not sweat, pain. And I was just like, this is absurd. So we can be very confused about why we're there, is my point. I've lost my train of thought, but what I would love to know, one of the things that you talk about is accessibility, but you also talk a lot about consent. And in the fitness space, that is a very novel concept. Sadly, we are used to the vision of a personal trainer acting like a dictator, right? We're very used to that vision of like, well, you will do this, you will do this many, you will do it when I say, you will stop when I tell you, I will decide when you're done. And we've normalized that so much. We don't question it. You know, I mean, we do, but as a general kind of statement, we don't question it. We treat it as being very normal and very necessary, right? Because it's like, well, I can't motivate myself, so I'm going to need this person to push me. So can you talk a little bit about consent and what that actually looks like in the fitness space? Because I think that's very foreign for a lot of us to consider what that would even look like.
Yeah, absolutely. Can we put a pin in that? I do want to circle back to
Yeah.
accessibility because there are just a couple of things that glaring things that I want to note that, you know, they're not the lanes I wandered down, but, you know, seeing representation of different races and
Mm.
ages is super important. We have an active aging class in our space. And those folks are a little bit shocked when they first walk in because they may not have ever been in a gym type of space.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we always get some people peering in the window when they're
Oh.
milling about, like, you know, do I belong here? And like, you know, just want to say, yes, you do. Yes, we did talk about size. And then there was one more thing. Oh, financial access. And this is like an
Mm.
entirely separate, you know, could be an entirely separate podcast or, you know, session in and of itself. How, you know, how things can be tiered, how that can be handled. Different people have different approaches, right? For us, it looks like
Mm-hmm.
offering things via Zoom, kind of low level entry points, and then offering things in the studio, and then personal training being kind of like the highest level of one-on-one service. This is not something that I am excellent at right now. Starting a business in a pandemic, and then, you know, while you're pregnant is not the best for, you know, we're trying to we need to stay solvent too. I haven't been as diligent about this as possible, but, you know, we do have some schemes by which folks who may not otherwise have financial access to some of the work that we do, they are covered by folks who are a little bit more generous in what they can pay. So,
Mm.
you know, we do try to level that as well, although that is something I admit I am less comfortable talking about. It's very, money can be an
Mm.
uncomfortable
Money
conversation.
can be a very uncomfortable
Um,
conversation. I hear you.
but
Yeah,
I think it's very naive not to mention that when it comes to access. Yeah.
absolutely.
So, you know, all of those things are sort of encompassed in access. Um, yes. When you talk
Mm.
about, and when you talk about, then, you know, if you're listening and you run a fitness space or you run any kind of business space, I will warn you that this becomes a very slippery slope when you start to look at it, because it's very easy to see all the places you're not measuring up. And I think, Erica, you did touch on that, right? The folks that teach in my space right now are all what would be considered smaller sized. You know, and I would love to change that, but that's not where we are right now at this moment.
Yeah.
And so, you know, yeah, there's always something that you think, you know, and I think it's a slippery slope and it's a good thing. And it can also be sort of frustrating And you have to carefully walk that line. My husband
Yeah,
is always telling me, but you're doing all of these things. And I say, yeah, but these are all the things I'm not doing. um,
absolutely.
and,
Yeah.
I think as you shift that, though, you shift a lot of things. You talk about people thinking their bodies are broken or wrong, or there's something wrong with them if they don't belong there. I was thinking about something the other day. I was having a conversation with my middle kid, and he was putting on some piece of clothing, and my daughter was like, "No, you can't wear that. You're too big." And I said, "No, he's not too big." I said, the shirt is too small. The shirt's not right for him anymore. Right. The
Hmm.
way that we talk about bodies at home is,
Yes.
no, it's not wrong. That's not wrong. What's wrong is the clothing. What's wrong is the equipment. What's wrong is the way that we're approaching this. What's wrong is me. I've given you the wrong exercise. It's not you. And so I think, it's both humbling and really important as professionals that
Mm.
we think about all of those things and get ready, because then you're going to start thinking about everything you do.
Yes, and then there's that invitation, my stuff always comes back to kindness, and so it's that invitation to still then be kind and compassionate towards yourself, right? And I'm constantly struck by the circularity of that, because so much of our own distress comes from that inner critical kind of noise, right? And so often that inner critic can be for a really kind of like good cause. Like it comes from a place of wanting to do our best. It comes from this place of wanting to be serving in a particular kind of way. And yet we are also very important in the context of our businesses and our lives and our families and our relationships. And so being able to kind of dance that dance, I think, is incredibly important and effortful. It requires some effort to meet ourselves there. So I appreciate you sharing the messier parts of that, because I know, as someone who, I truly admire the work that you're doing, and I often watch and think, oh, Holly puts me to shame in terms of the way that she can talk about this and the way that you show these things. And so that can happen in the business world, right? Or in the world in general, where we're doing this comparison thing. And I always appreciate it when people share that, I like, this is still really messy for me. This is still
It's so
fraught with
messy.
discomfort. Um, I always think our humanity is much better shared than hidden. So thank you for that.
So messy, so messy. But anyway, so yes, I did just want to kind of add that as
Yes.
you were reflecting back, that was sort of my response to that. But I do want to definitely circle back to consent, because I think this
Yes.
is, people often, there's the joke oftentimes with your children or with your work, is this the hill you want to die on? I would almost die on the consent hill,
Hmm.
because it's so crucial. And this is definitely a very different take in general, and it is even more radical in Singapore, I would say, than in some other countries. When I was working in big commercial gym teaching yoga, this was all pre-COVID. One of the things that was participants often liked that we would do is kind of walk around the room, and you could have 20, 30 people in a room, and so to walk around the room and check in on everybody a little more
Yeah.
closely, I guess. And one thing that some folks often did when they were teaching is put their hands on people and give them an adjustment, as the yoga word, right,
Hmm.
for it. And different teacher trainings would tell you different things. And when I took mine, we practiced them. And then I got to teaching, and I kind of told myself I wasn't going to do it, especially at first, because I didn't know someone's body. This is a group class. This isn't someone that I'm seeing one-on-one. This is just a group of people that rocked up to class anywhere between 5 minutes before and 5 minutes after we started and put down their mats. I don't really, I don't really know them or anything about their history. So I said, I'm not touching people. And and then as I sort of evolved as a teacher, I realized that, sometimes there's a way that a little bit of contact actually helps people make some adjustments and move. Some people move well in response to, a tap or something to push into or whatnot. And so then I started using a yoga block to do that. And then I started thinking about the things that I was teaching at that time, wanted to teach my daughter. I had a little baby, just a baby, but and thinking about the idea of consent um, and there are always cycles of, Me Too and sexual, some famous, there's always stuff about
Yeah.
consent around sex surfacing up in the US for sure, maybe in Australia. In Singapore, it's mushed down a little bit more, but and so thinking about all of these things and thinking about how I was teaching, and so basically what I did in my group classes was I would tell them, they all got a tag that said they were registered for class, and so at the start of class I would say, if you are open to the idea of a touch with a block or with a strap, or if I can, then leave your card face down. And if you prefer not to be touched, then just leave your card face up. And I simply won't touch you. And that was met with a lot of confusion. And people would come up to me after class and say, well, my card was down, but you didn't touch me. Like the expectation of me
Ah,
touching, and I wasn't touching a lot of people, and it was mostly through a block. Like I was doing the bare, like tiniest bit. And people were so confused by this because it was something they'd never come across before. So this is like consent cards. Sometimes you see them in
mm,
yoga, like they actually give out a deck. I was just using the little
yes.
gym class registration cards. And I realized how new these concepts were. Over the same time, I had been in classes where honestly I had been not touched inappropriately. Sorry, it's all inappropriate if it's not consensual. But I don't want to be pushed anymore into I don't want to be pushed into a more deep version of a yoga pose. And I realized that for myself, when a teacher that I knew was a toucher would come near me, if I was a participant, I would stiffen up because I was so resistant to the idea of being touched by someone that didn't really know my body or why I was making the choices I was making. So all of this is kind of swirling around in my head. And so, when I started working on my own, and then when I opened the space, said, to position us as a consent-based space means that we always ask before we touch. And that is the very bare minimum. And that's how my instructors are trained. We never touch someone their first time in the studio. And, subsequently, if you're working with someone and you think, kind of what I say is you need to be able to tell me why it's benefiting that person if you're going to do it. And you need to ask them every time. I
Yes.
don't care if it disrupts class. I don't care if they tell you, oh, yeah, you can always touch me. It doesn't matter. You have to ask every time. Um, because that's at the bare minimum what we should be doing if we're touching other people.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I've had so many clients. I'm very, very minimal in my touch, as well. But there will be times, like you say, where that person just purely benefits from that brain body connection of going, oh, that's where you mean. Um, and I have had so many clients be like, yeah, like you do not have to ask me, and I'm like, no, I do. I have to ask you every time because you might change your mind, and that's totally your prerogative. I think the thing that's really important to sort of hear for people who are listening who maybe aren't teachers, right, or aren't on that side of things, is to recognize that no matter how much you respect your instructor or that teacher that's in front of you, there is a power differential there that even if both of you are very much not into that power dynamic, right? You're not kind of trying to certainly not trying to exploit it. You're not trying to even buy into it. There is a power differential there that just comes from the nature of the relationship. Now, I don't think there should be, right? Like, I'm not saying that I think there should be a power differential and that the teacher knows more than you or anything like that at all. But recognize that when we're in a position like that, where there is a level of just sort of social um, power differentials, the decision making that you engage in is different. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so we very easily can be drawn into believing that we don't have a choice or
Mm-hmm.
wanting to please that person in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and anyone who sort of identifies as being a bit of a people pleasing kind of personality so easy to slip into that. And then to
Mhm.
later think, wow, or maybe not even think it, but, to be kind of handing your power away without really intending to do that. And so
Yeah.
even in the spaces like you have and the spaces that I cultivate as well, we can be like, we're all equal here. Like there is no power differential, but they exist, right? And so it can change our willingness to speak up. And so I've been in positions like that too, where I stiffen up because somebody's coming over to touch me, but it it it, it was never in my skill set at the
Mhm.
time to say no.
Yeah. And it is something that I will sometimes talk about in my classes, ways to say no.
I
Right.
love
Not
that.
just, you don't, especially in a class setting, right? In a personal training
Yeah.
setting, yeah, if they say, can I touch you? You kind of have to say like, yes or no.
No. Yeah.
But in a class, how can you decline a touch if you don't want one, right?
Mm.
Especially again, there's like layers of culture here, but sometimes in Singapore or in some Southeast or East Asian cultures, the idea of saying no is kind of offensive, right? So how can
Ah,
we say no without just saying no, don't touch me? And this power dynamic is super, super at play here. This person knows better because they're the teacher.
yes.
No, you know better because it's your body. But let's
Yes, you're in there.
collaborate so that we can both use our areas of expertise,
Yes. Oh,
kind
I
of
love that.
thing. So,
Mm.
I think, I mean, and that's the bare minimum, I would say, as far as consent goes. And as I cultivated the space that I work in, um, it started to crop up in other things as well. I have I have very limited and boundaried ways that I do packages or
Mhm.
subscriptions because I don't want. I've had so many people come into the studio trying to get out of personal training relationships that don't work, but they've bought 30
Mm.
sessions because that seemed like a good idea and that was what was required and it was cheaper than buying 10 and whatnot, right?
Yeah.
So I want you to continually opt in to being in our space.
Hmm.
Now, from a business perspective, there's also some things to consider there. So we have some back end ease of
Mm.
back end kind of stuff, but
Yeah.
people are continually needing to choose to come back to the space rather than feel like they're locked in here. um, I never penalize people for because I
Yeah.
want you
Oh, I
to
love that so much.
come back willingly, not because you've
Mhm.
got all these sessions hanging over your head, right?
Yes.
I want you to be using what you have. I want you to be eagerly using what you are opting
Yeah.
for.
And
Um,
how often do we I know that there's been times where I'm like considered going back to the gym and I just won't because I'm like I don't want to be locked in again, I don't want that lock-in contract. Um
and the
and so it
sales
stops
part,
me going off after something that that you want. So I totally get that.
and then it trickles even into the way that I do sales, and I don't do sales, but I do have, as most of us have, some sort of discovery call, right? You
Yeah.
can book 15 minutes, let's chat. And I'm very clear at the beginning of that call. I said, this is not a sales call. I do not
Mhm.
have a pitch for you at the end. The only thing that I want to do is listen to your situation. With your permission, I will share with you what options we might have that would address the concerns or needs that you have. And if I don't think that we do, I will give you some suggestions of other people or places you might want to access. That is all. I will follow up with an email that has these details so you don't have to memorize them all. And that, by the way, is an access issue. Not everybody is an auditory processor, right?
Mm.
So I'm going to follow up with one email with this information, and then you choose to do what you want. The ball is in your court. You do not sign anything. You do not agree to anything at the end of this call.
Mm.
Um, and so it trickles into consent-based sales. So they say something and they say, can I share with you some things that we might offer that might meet these needs, right? And then they say yes. I mean, usually they say yes, but
Yeah.
I guess
Yeah.
I mean, that's why they book the call, but a
Mhm.
continual, right, incent has to be, gosh, now I'm not going to remember, but there's a few things, but it needs to be continued, right?
Mhm.
You can say no at any
Yeah, you can
point,
withdraw your consent
right?
anytime you like. Yeah.
But it's not truly consent if you don't feel free to withdraw it.
Yes. That's
So for
coercion.
example, when
Yeah.
it comes to photography, my business, like mentor makes her bananas because I won't take pictures in the studio of anyone, no one
Mhm.
except myself
Yep.
and my kids maybe sometimes, although also with consent, because I don't feel comfortable giving everyone a waiver that they tick mark when they come in that says I can take pictures and use them for promotion. And it's standard in out here. Everybody does it. It's very standard. I don't even want to say at the end of class, hey, can we grab a picture together? Because I don't feel that that gives people freedom to say no, actually.
Yeah.
Particularly again in a cultural context where in of Singapore, where group think is very important and not sticking out is very important. I don't think I can get an enthusiastic and honest consent from people in that kind of situation. So
Mm.
there's no, if you're taking a photo, it needs to be of you and only you or someone who has given you enthusiastic consent. And that's it. No one else. Check your backgrounds, check the space. We really discourage photos inside the studio space. Yeah, for exactly that reason. And that is
Yeah.
related to consent as well.
Mm. Yeah, I really
You
appreciate
know,
that. That's awesome.
I think we need to remember, and again, it's might look a little different for folks. And I would encourage you, if you're a movement professional who's just starting dabbling in this idea, start with the physical part. You don't
Mm.
have to do everything all at once. Um, maybe this goes back to what we were just talking about, right, Erica? Yes,
Yeah.
ideally all of these things are in place, but I didn't think of them all at once.
No.
Right?
And it
When
can
I
be very uncomfortable, kind of feeling like a bit of a contradiction, can't it? But at the same time, good luck trying to, do everything all at once and
yeah,
and
yeah.
and still enjoy the process. So I really appreciate that. Now, I do have my eye on the time, and
Mm,
I know I have you for literally just a couple of minutes more.
mm.
So it doesn't feel like a particularly natural place to stop, but I want to give you the opportunity to do a couple of things, which is sort of tell us where we can find you,
Mm.
particularly if anyone does happen to be listening in Singapore, where they can actually physically find you.
I
But I know you've got some online options as well,
yeah,
and just give you an opportunity to kind of like wrap up with any kind of final thoughts to share with us before
yeah.
we finish
Gosh.
up.
Gosh, I guess we could go on for eons, right?
I
Right,
know, I'm
Erica?
like, can
I've
we do
only
it to part two?
when we
Feel like we've
book that
scratched
in,
the
I'll
surface.
clear an extra half an hour.
Perfect.
Yeah, I yes. If you happen to be in Singapore looking for a space, a different kind of space to practice in, I think we are actually quite complementary to what Erica offers. We don't overlap directly. We do a lot of strength training right now, some personal training, both on Zoom and in studio. By the way, that's also an access question. Not everyone has transport or finances for transport to get into the studio
Mm.
for in-person sessions, even on a teeny tiny island. So or time, so Zoom is always an option for us. We are I guess, is there anything final? Maybe it's a teaser for part two.
Yeah.
Some of the other things that make us I would say radically different, besides just access and consent, which are huge things, and each one could probably go on to breed its own sort of issue topic. Podcast, I guess.
Mm.
We are child friendly for most of our classes. So if you need to bring your kid or kids in, we will make that work. As I said, my kids often spend time in the space. Um, I don't know. I just got a thing that said we disconnected from the server. So we are
Oh,
child
we're
friendly.
still here.
And now we're reconnected. So I don't know. So we're child friendly. You'll often see one or several of my children in the studio. We are anti-diet culture, I think, is
Mm.
the current phraseology that I'm using. That does not, because that gives us the most freedom to operate. To the That is a way to give folks to acknowledge that everyone has autonomy over their bodies, but we don't buy into the idea of diet culture and that we need to make ourselves smaller to make ourselves valuable.
Mhm.
Um, we will never sell you shakes or diet plans or anything like that. We don't equate movement with calories in, calories out. You eat this and burn it off that way. Like, we don't do any of that crap. We
Yeah.
eat because food tastes good and we need to fuel ourselves, and there's so much wrapped up in food, and we move to help our bodies feel better. And live the lives that we want to live, and we try really hard to dissociate those two things and uh, all of the attachments that come along with them sometimes.
Yeah.
We are also, I would say, we work to be, in that sense, body neutral, not judging people and their capabilities based on how they look. Um, because you don't know anything about anyone's story when they come in. I would not go so far. And all of these things kind of sum up, trauma informed is sort of a
Mm.
catchy phrase word right now. And to be bluntly honest, I've never taken a trauma informed training. But I think when you do all of these things, you make yourself a lot more open and welcoming to people who maybe haven't had great experiences in lots of ways, whether they be related to size or ability or ableism or consent or whatnot.
Mm.
So, you are, if you are a gym owner who is, or a studio owner, or a personal trainer who is prioritizing these things, I guess my pep talk to you is keep going. There are so many people that need that message, that need that approach, and it's not sexy, and it doesn't sell you a million followers or sell you a million copies of your whatever, but I think it really, in that sense, is sort of passion work, because it is very much needed. You deserve to be paid.
Yeah.
I we also stand by that very strongly. Fitness professionals deserve to make a living wage, but keep going, because there are so many people who are not being served in spaces that already exist, and we
Mm.
need more spaces that they feel comfortable and confident in. And that may not be my space. We are not for everyone, and that's
Mm.
okay. But if what I'm saying resonates with you and you're curious to check us out, we're movement-labs.com. That's our website. You can see all of our classes and personal training options from there, and just read a little more about us. If you look back in a week, maybe that will actually be updated. You could read two different versions of the website. And we're on Instagram as the same, movement-labs. We also do other social, but Instagram is where we are the most active. I am the voice and the fingers behind that account. We talk about a lot of studio stuff, but you also see a bit about my life and the messiness of that. So that's where you can find us. In Singapore, we're on Upper Thompson Road, just above the Shenzong.
Love it. Love it. Love it. I cannot thank you enough, Holly. This has been such a wonderful conversation. Like I said, I feel like we've just kind of like done the intro, but that's fine. We will endeavor to do a part two. I think just to kind of like jump on the end of what you were saying there around, for other fitness professionals. But if you're not that, right, and you're listening to this, I think the big takeaway that kind of springs to mind for me is like, advocate for yourself, finding the space that does work for you, or the spaces. I think we can very quickly come to believe that there is one sort of option, and it's just not true. You have to hunt a little bit, and you have to look a little deeper sometimes to find these spaces and places and people that feel like the right fit for you. But the it's worth it. It is completely worth that extra effort to find a place where you feel comfortable and taken care of.
Most of us are so busy helping our clients and working on our spaces that we're not speaking the loudest on social media. So you have to look
Yes,
for us a little bit more.
that's
We're
it.
not spending our
Exactly.
time and money on the slickest advertising. So yes, you do need to
That's
hunt a
it.
little bit.
That's it. Thank you so much, Holly. This has been an absolute treat. And thank you, everyone, for listening. We'll talk to you again really soon.
Thanks, Erica. Have a great day.